Continuamos en la Feria Internacional del Libro de Guadalajara y como muchas ocasiones nos encontramos con grandes autores. En esta edición de la feria nos encontramos con Kelly Barnhill, quien es una gran autora conocida por libros como Cuando, nosotras éramos dragonas, y también por otros que tenemos por acá atrás, La niña que se bebió la luna, entre otros muchos que encontramos en editorial Loqueleo. En este caso vamos a platicar especialmente sobre este, que es uno de sus libros más recientes, que es Cuando nosotros fuimos dragonas, y que habla acerca de una historia bastante curiosa, una historia muy interesante que se sitúa en Estados Unidos por ahí de 1950, en una historia de realismo mágico que nos cuenta la historia de una niña llamada Alexandra, pero que si a ella le decías por su nombre te iba a decir me llamo Alex. Entonces es una niña que de alguna forma siempre vivió en una sociedad que la oprimía no solo por ser niña, sino también por ser mujer, y en una sociedad que básicamente se basaba en guardar silencio sobre las cosas incómodas. Y hoy tendremos el gusto de estar platicando con ella, pero como ella viene de Estados Unidos, habla inglés y vamos a tener que poner subtítulos a lo largo de todo este video. Así que voy a hacer todas las preguntas para ella en su idioma, pero ustedes lo podrán comprender gracias a la tecnología. Kelly, it's a pleasure to have this talk with you.
Oh, Bruno, it's so nice to be here. Thank you so much for coming.
Oh, well, thank you for giving the time to talk about this book. And, well, I must say I'm really excited to talk about it because I think that it's a book that makes you think. Yeah. Not only like get distracted with the story, just have a good trip around the world that you show us in this book, but also to keep thinking about all those topics that you talk about in this book. I must ask you a question that is really in my mind since I started this book. Why is it in the 50s and 60s of the USA?
Good question. So part of it was just kind of an accident of its beginning, right? Because once a story gets going, you kind of get tied to it, you know? And at the time, so I started this book in a place of just deep frustration and anger. And in fact, its original title was Rage Story, as I was in this place of rage. And I thought I was going to write a short story about a bunch of 1950s housewives who turn into dragons and eat their husbands, right? Because that was the sort of mood I was in. And very quickly, it became something very different. But part of the reason is that the sort of what was causing my sort of frustration at the moment. We were sort of in the middle of the first Trump administration, and there was a new Supreme Court justice that was coming up, and who had been, credibly accused of some pretty bad things. And so there was frustration about that. There was some frustration about the fact that it was pretty clear that the laws in my country would change, and women's bodily autonomy would be going away. And so what people kept saying was that these laws are going to send us back to the 1950s. That was sort of a phrase that kept on going around and around. Really, I could have put this at any time, but but that is where I began, and then that was just the world that I found myself in. So I just had to keep plowing forward. So yeah, that's where things are. But of course, in the course of the book, we learned that dragoning has happened in different parts in history. Yeah. So I could have put it at any time, but that's just where it was.
Yeah, and well, that explains a lot the origin of this story. Yeah. Because in this book, even though it's in the USA on the past, it has some topics that still make us reflection in our society in the 21st century. Yeah. And I mean, like, there's a society that it's mainly based on keeping quiet when some topics are uncomfortable. Yes. When male people or these men that control the world, this world in the book and in the history they have also done it. So these men get uncomfortable talking about some topics, and people must keep quiet. Yes. Something that we think that nowadays with all the social media wouldn't happen, but it still happening in our world. We still keep quiet about topics that we actually must talk about.
Yes.
Mainly when it's about the anatomic parts
Yes.
of a woman, because it's like a topic that we must not talk about.
Yes.
Why do you think that this happens in our world?
You know, it happens over and over again. Back in the 50s, and this has nothing to do with reproduction, but when people would get cancer, like you didn't want to say the word cancer, and if you did, they would say cancer. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? That it was sort of a banned topic. It made people so uncomfortable, so scared, so sad that they just sort of like talked around it as if it didn't exist. And I think that we do that all the time. It becomes this hole in the universe, you know. When I was a kid, I lost a member of my family to suicide. It was terrible. It was an awful, awful time. But there was this again talking around it. We don't want to address the thing of trauma. Back in 1918, there was the Spanish flu, or the pandemic flu that went around the world, and wasn't really from Spain, but it was called the Spanish flu for all kinds of dumb reasons.
Yeah.
But my great grandfather died in that flu. My great grandmother was pregnant with my grandma and caught that flu and almost died. Thank goodness she didn't, because then I wouldn't be here. But my dad did not learn that his grandfather had died in the flu until he was well into adulthood. And in fact, it was millions of people died. 6 million Americans died in that flu, and yet we don't have any monuments to it. Like, we've never learned about it in school, and so I do think that this is a natural response to trauma. It becomes this like blank, and then people just sort of move on, don't talk about it, right?
Yeah.
And that is what has happened with dragons as well. So women have turned into dragons over history, and nobody speaks of it.
Yeah, of course. And well, that's something that it's really important in this story, because this keeping quiet is like swallowing things, I think about stones maybe,
Yeah.
that it starts to have a more weight on yourself.
100%.
That actually are like I don't know, like these balloons that go in the sky that
Yeah.
has these
The
bags of
weights.
sand
Yeah.
that weight it down. So I think that that's what happens when you swallow all those things not to talk about
Yeah.
them.
Yeah.
So I think that this story, when it happens, this massive organization in the USA,
Yeah.
on
Over 600,000 women all at once.
turned to dragons, and I think that it's not like just like a fantastic argument in the story. I think that it's also a metaphor,
Yeah.
right, about the transformations that happens in every life. I mean, like when we grow, we
Yeah.
have a real strong transformation
Yeah.
from a kid to an adult.
Yeah.
But also, I think that it's like another metaphor that it's behind it. Would you tell us what is what you wanted to show with this dragonization?
Yeah, that's so interesting, because I think that part of the thing about writing fiction is that a lot of these metaphors are deeply internal. So I think that a lot of times we don't really let ourselves like bring it right up to here, because, so this is sort of getting into my grand unified theory of fiction. I do believe that fiction is always a collaboration. So it's a collaboration of my imagination and your imagination, right? You know, that I write the words and you bring the imagination, and then the story is somewhere between us, right? But also in the creation of the book, it is a collaboration between my front brain, my sort of prefrontal cortex, right, where all of my logic and language is, and my back brain, which is where my images are. This is where colors live. This is where my deep feelings live too. And my back brain speaks in a language that my front brain doesn't speak. My front brain speaks in a language that my back brain doesn't speak. And somehow the story happens as a working together in between. right? And so I think that that all of these things, like these bigger metaphors that are absolutely at play. Like, I wasn't thinking about any of those. I don't really see what I've done until after. Oh, look, there it is. But
Well,
I do think, so one of the things that was happening in the 1950s in America is that during the war, all kinds of women went to work. And they built the ships, and they built the munitions, and they went and they joined the army and the women's corps, as Alex's aunt did. They made the cars. They went to work in the factories, and then when the men came home, they were expected to go home, and to leave all of that behind. And so some that that was fine, and for others it wasn't. And so I do think that that there was one of the things that I was trying to get at is these moments of sort of cultural discomfort that lead to social change, And anyway, so that's what was going on in my head. I'm pretty sure if I kind of have to reverse engineer it. It's like whenever I'm finished a book, then I have to I feel like I'm an archaeologist, sort of piecing together. Okay, what was going on when I did that?
Oh yeah. Well, sometimes the story seems like it takes life.
Yeah.
And it's like another being
Yeah.
that works apart from us.
It's true. Ursula Le Guin is one of my favorite writers, and she often talks about how writers don't create; they discover. And so there is so much of the sort of writing as an act of discovery, and so I'm trying to figure it out just along with my readers too. So,
All right. Well, and also in this book, as you mentioned a few minutes ago, an important character is Aunt Marla.
Yeah.
This strong woman
Yeah.
that was a mechanic.
Uh-huh.
She used to fix some airplanes,
Yeah.
some cars.
Yeah.
And would you tell us what if this Aunt Marla was someone in your life? If she existed in a part of you, or maybe you just imagined an aunt that you would have liked to
Oh,
have.
that's awesome. I do have a lot of aunts, so many aunts.
Well, a big
and
family.
so many cousins. I have a very big family, and so Aunt Marla is in some ways an amalgamation of little bits and pieces of different aunties of my heart, but also she is also just her own self too.
Yeah.
Sometimes a character sort of walks onto the page and they just are so larger than life that oh geez, I don't have to do anything for you. You have given me everything. Thank you, Aunt Marla. Writers are kind of like magpies, sort of little wonderful little tidbits we sort of gather and sort of put away in our little tree.
Yeah. And this character is also important because she's so big inside her.
Yeah.
And she's she's so surrounded with dragons also
Yeah.
in her environment.
Uh-huh.
And it seems like she was also a dragon inside her.
Yes.
Well, we see it along this story. I don't want to make any spoiler.
Right.
But there's another character that I was really mad about him when I read this book.
Uh-huh.
That was the father of Alex.
Yeah. He's terrible.
Yeah, of course, totally. But he was never a father that was in home.
Yeah.
He was never someone who Alex could talk to.
Yes.
He was never there.
Yeah.
He was always in job trips and other parts that we can imagine what he was doing from what happens after in the story. But, well, I think that is something that at least in my environment here in Latin America, we see lots of fathers or our parents, also sometimes the mother, but it's mainly the man, that leaves the children,
Yeah.
leaves the family alone,
Yeah.
and they think that only with sending money
Yeah.
or material things,
Right.
they can substitute the love.
Yeah.
I mean, like in my family, there's people that I've known that have abandoned their kids,
Yeah.
and I think about how could they do that?
Yeah.
How could
Yeah.
they think
Yeah.
that even substituting the love with something material by buying them things, really, is that
Yeah.
truly something
Yeah.
that could even be, I don't know, valid?
Right. I mean, one of the things that I think is that I hope people notice is that so we have this idea of patriarchy, right? And we often talk about patriarchy as something that exclusively hurts women, but it doesn't. It hurts men. He's hurt by this.
Also,
he
yeah.
is, and his life is devastated, and so he has been sold this lie that all he has to do is be a provider, and he does, and by that measure, he is being a good father from his point of view, because I have provided for my children, I have written the checks, right? That's all I have to do. I have set up this apartment, and I don't see them, and by doing that, he has cut himself off from relationship. He has cut himself off from support. He has cut himself off from all of that, and so much of that too is and you see that he has the capacity to actually be a good person. You can see when Alex's mother is very ill, you can see his fear, his grief, his tenderness even. But again, it is this. He didn't have the what he needed to be able to, and that is because of patriarchy. Patriarchy hurt him as much as it hurt these women who had no other choice but to turn into dragons.
Yeah, and it's like Mr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde,
Yeah.
Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde.
Yeah,
sorry,
yeah, yeah. Uh-huh.
That has two lives completely different.
Yeah.
He always wear masks to be a strong
Yeah.
man.
Uh-huh.
This idea that we have a man, like this a military idea
Yeah.
of someone who doesn't show feelings.
Right.
And at the end of the day, he's completely alone, even though he was surrounded with people that could have loved him.
Yeah, that
but
could have
they
loved
didn't
him.
because he never showed them that
Right.
love that he could have also received. And I think that it's something that really it's a strong point of the formation of Alex. It's
Yeah.
the main character here.
Yeah.
And I think that she could also get away from that situation, and it was also because of the freedom that she had inside. I mean,
Yeah.
science is always. Because the mother of Alex was a mathematician.
Yes.
Alex always wanted to be also a mathematician,
Yeah.
or at least a scientist.
Yeah.
And I think that science gives you a little hope of freedom,
Right.
of asking questions, of getting away from what you know.
100%. Another thing that science does is that it is this process of being able to make mistakes, and in fact mistakes are part of the process, and also being willing to be wrong about an idea, because you have to test it, and then you have to test it a bunch of times, and that's also part of the process. And so I think that being in that mindset does give a person a lot of freedom. One of the things about the 1950s is that there were very static and rigid ideas of what a woman is, what a man is, what a family is, and so there's this moment where Alex is realizing that the only time that they really act like a happy family is when the door is open and he's leaving, when people can see. But actually, it's all kind of fake, she lays out a place at the table for somebody that she knows isn't going to come home, and so I think that that for Alex, that she sees in science, and she sees also through the character of Mrs. Kaczynska, the librarian, because librarians always save the day, always.
Yeah.
I love librarians so much, but she sees sees through the life of the mind and the life of a scientist a way to claim a life that was bigger than the life that she was promised, which of course is what the dragons are doing too, right? They are claiming a self and a world and a life that is bigger than the life that they were promised. And Alex chooses that through her pursuit of science.
And sometimes we don't even know how we got to the point that we have to live these plastic fake lives, and we don't even like them. So why are we living them? And that's why the dragons, after a lot of problems with the government, with the people, actually they all what they wanted was a better world to live in. So also an important part of the character, even though it's not like the main part of Alex, is that she was not like this ideal woman of the time, ideal in the structures of the people in that time. Starting by she didn't like men, she liked women, and that point is really important. But what I really liked about it is that you as an author, you didn't make like a big deal that she was lesbian. You only say that she had a girlfriend, and just like that, talking with that, I don't know, with that like confidence that it's something normal, completely normal. Because I don't know, it's something that I don't like of nowadays society, that we sometimes try to in some works to fill a number of women and a number of men, a number of the community LGBT, and a number of what they of homosexual or heterosexual people. They try to just fill a number, not really because what they are, and not really because they left behind all those structures that women are weak, that women are I don't know, dumb. So I think that it's really important what you did in this book by talking naturally about something that nowadays would be in some societies something like a big deal. She's lesbian, but you just mention it as something natural. Why?
I mean, partially because I think that human sexuality and human love happens in an organic way. You know, I think that, and I think that one of the things that has been problematic with our sort of like needing to categorize everybody is that it sort of takes away how we tend to like find hearts that match our hearts, you know, which we aren't thinking, you know, we aren't putting people in the boxes. We just see this one person, you know, and that was Alex's situation, that she saw this one person who she loved, and then she finds her again and loves her, and then like and that just is the way that her life moves, you know. And sometimes we don't even get to be with the person that we love for all kinds of reasons, you know. Sometimes we just choose different things in our life, you know, and that happens too. We go in different directions. That's part of young love too, you know. And I remember so my oldest child is not a child anymore, an adult, but is queer, and as a teenager was so annoyed that like all of the queer books would be in a separate shelf. Like it's just like, why aren't books just books? You know what I mean? And so I do think that the more that we can sort of just like allow a human being to just be a human being and connect with other human beings in a way that makes sense to that person at that time and with that specific heart, you know? So anyway, that's how I feel.
And not judging them for being what they are. I think that it's something that it's really important in your book that we cannot see even in books that try to be inclusive. And they really just talk about Alexandra in this book, all the characters,
Yeah.
like it's something completely natural
Normal.
as it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, so-
Yeah, it is. It's really true. My oldest son is transgender, and so as with anything, and so that was the other thing that like I really did want to make clear in this, that like this idea of like the divine feminine is again, it's bigger than what people thought, you know. And so we have all these women who become dragons, but we see drag queens becoming dragons too. And that so much of the sort of like the process of becoming who we are, whether we are cisgender or transgender, whether we are gay or we are straight, whether we are whatever, so much of it is allowing the trueness of ourselves to burst forward and to transform not only like how we see ourselves, but how the world sees us and how the world sees itself too. All of this is ripe for transformation, you know, and so I feel like that's that is, you know, particularly as I was sort of like going through, I had these 3 big chunks of text that I had to weave together, but as I was going through all of my different revisions, that I wanted to make sure that like somebody who needed to hear that was going to hear that, you know. So anyway,
I think that among the story we find also this message, this invitation to be ourselves, right?
Yes,
To be
yes.
free, free from those adults that tell us as children that we cannot talk.
Yeah.
That's a topic for adults.
Yeah.
Or for women that no, you won't understand it because you're dumb. Or even to these women that want to become dragons. And it's also like a trip around the life of Alex and with her cousin sister Bea, of understanding that we must let the people that surround us be themselves.
Yes,
To be
100%.
free.
And even for Alex, that was hard, you know.
Yeah.
Even for because all of that, by allowing our loved ones to become themselves, we do have to let go of the life that we thought that because even when we love people, sometimes we try to hold them tight, and sometimes we try to, you know, keep them right here because outside seems scary, you know.
Yeah.
And that comes from a real place with Alex. I mean, she had a lot to be afraid of, you know, and she had a lot on her plate, and it was and so that even though she was in the wrong, we can see where that comes from, and we know that it comes from a place of love.
Because
you know?
we can see that Alex grew up in an environment that had all those structures, and an important thing that it's something that I admire from Alex in this book is that she was able to break those structures and actually get forward of it. So it's really a big book that touches a lot of lots of these topics that make us think, and I think that is what really makes a good really special. That it's not only like living the story, that it's also important that we also have with a great narrative, also in the translated to the Spanish.
Yes.
So I think that it's a book that makes us think that. Yesterday when I went to sleep, I kept thinking about the book because
awesome.
I don't know. There's a lot of things to think about, to actually stop in some parts of the book and say and think, why did Kelly chose those words also? So it's a book that really get you guys as readers to a world that it's also our world, but in the past, but it's also a world that has the same problematics that we have nowadays. It's a metaphor. So thank you very much, Kelly, for writing this book and talking with me.
Yeah, this is really a great conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you for giving me the time. And thank you for watching this interview. We'll still make some others in the International Book Fair of Guadalajara. Nos vemos hasta la próxima.